My very special guest is widely recognized as the business alchemist. She has over 3 decades of experience driving innovation and resilience across industries. She empowers business owners and executives with actionable strategies to navigate challenges while maintaining operational excellence. She has delivered impactful keynotes at TEDx, at Ivy League institutions such as Columbia, and even at the White House. She is Aleida Lindahl. Welcome to the show, Aleida.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Matt.
It's my absolute pleasure. We've only had brief conversation. I got a chance to be exposed to your work a little bit, and I just really feel like we're kindred spirits, so to speak. And I just can't wait to dig into the topics with you today.
Yeah, I agree completely after reading your book as well. It's like, expand the circle. I love that that's your mission and that that's where you're headed with everything. We can't have enough of that.
Yeah, and I think it's a great way of getting us started. If you're listeners of this show in particular, they know that the way that we used to approach the management discipline certainly is outdated for today's context. We've certainly moved beyond a lot of what passes for leadership and management today. But even so, we don't always agree with what comes next in terms of that next level leadership, I would say. And in your work, you present us with something that you refer to as conscious leadership, which I love. And I wonder if you could tell us about conscious leadership, what really characterizes it, and what makes it important right now.
Yeah, so conscious leadership is really more about kind of an operational model. It's understanding how we are designed operationally to work and to flow. I call it kind of like a three-pillar system, and it really starts with conscious awareness. And the conscious awareness piece I also say could be equated to our spirit, depending on how a person looks at it, right? Everybody has different perspectives, but really what's important here is that most findings from psychology and neuroscience say that we are consciously aware an average of 5% of the time. Five. The other 95% we're primarily running in subconscious brain, meaning repeat patterns, right? That from experiences, things that we've experienced in life, our education, our upbringing, the list goes on and on. So learning to become more consciously aware, I think, is really vitally important at this time. It's also referred to as self-awareness, as mindfulness. There's many terms for it, right? The thing is enlightenment, as you say, right? And so from that aspect of things, we don't make new choices or new decisions until we are consciously aware. That's where I say it can almost be like if one wanted to relate it to spirit, you could, because it's about free will, right? You can make new choices and new decisions when you're conscious. It's one of the gifts that we have as a humanity is our ability to become and to stay consciously aware. So cultivating that, right, I believe is incredibly vitally important, because once we have that understanding, we can actually tell our brain what to do and it does it, right? Hypnotherapy has proven that you can tell your brain what to do and it does it. And then that, right, is important because when we tell our brain what to do, it's very fascinating because our brain controls our body and much of our physical functions, right? And we have to actually move our body physically. And so that's kind of like how I look at that, right? We have to maintain our physical well-being as well, right? And be mindful of that. But it kind of starts there. Let's get conscious. Then let's really pay attention to programming our brain and telling it what to do versus us thinking that it's telling us what to do and that's how we're meant to function, and really just push out of that.
Hmm. There's so much to unpack there, and I love the example about 5% being certainly conscious and highly self-aware, highly intentional, highly tuned, with the other 95% being almost like autopilot. And as you said, conditioned into responses. And when we think about the context of work that we're in all the time, it's just bombardment of stimulus response, stimulus response. The email was late or it came in. Now I have a last minute assignment. I got to take some work home with me. What's the reaction? When we don't hit the pause button and actually find that level of presence, then we can't make the best decisions, as you're pointing out. I love that.
Yeah.
It's so true. And then I think when you start looking at the organizations now, if you multiply that out to even a small team, like 5 or 6 people, if all of us, each of us are working at 95% unconscious, we're really getting almost, I don't want to say randomness, but we're getting a lot of a lack of that.
We're getting a lot of the same thing over and over and over again, right? And so it also makes me kind of like put a question mark in things like, okay, does history repeat itself because we haven't evolutionized and realized how our systems work and our capability to become conscious more frequently and more of the time?
Yeah, and then we wonder why we always get the same result, and it doesn't seem like anything has changed all this time
Right.
later. So
Correct.
that's where we want to get away from for sure. So I really love that, and as you talked about also the kind of the embodied nature of our experience, and where there's this tremendous connection between what we experience and how it shows up, how it feels, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had a coach on the show before where we talk about where does something feel in your body, how does that response when someone talks over you in a meeting, where do you feel that? Or when you feel anxious about going in to give a big presentation, a lot writing on this, where does that show up for you? And just that all of these are just great forms of that mindfulness and presence that you just shared with us.
Yeah, and one of my favorite studies is UMass Chan Medical Center, right? They've been studying awareness and mindfulness and how it affects our physical well-being for over 40 years. It's pretty
Wow.
incredible. And so pain threshold, pain management, it's used for so many things. That yeah, it's definitely a path to well-being.
A path to well-being, and you've talked a little bit about self-awareness. You make a strong case for it. For listeners that are in these leadership positions as leaders, what is it that we need to be self-aware of? Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the different things that we need to be looking out for?
Yes, I think one of the most important things is paying attention to our emotions, right? And so
Mm.
our emotions oftentimes will have a tendency to pull us in a specific direction and make us want to be reactionary, right? Depending on what the and it's any emotion, could be positive, could be negative, right? But really gaining awareness of our emotions, and also, the reason why I say that is because that will lead us back to our thought process. So when we become aware of our emotions, we can literally just pause ourselves when we're aware, right? And we can stop ourselves in that moment and we can ask ourselves, like, where is this coming from? Right? Where is this floodgate of emotion coming from? Because it's a chemical release in the physical body, pending our thoughts, right? It starts with our thought and then it becomes our emotion and then potentially a reaction.
Yeah, I think exactly as you're saying. If we don't have awareness, we just feel sort of on the receiving end and things just kind of happen for us. That's not to say that we have to judge the emotion or I'm frustrated that I felt that way in that meeting or try to push it down as if it doesn't exist or ignore it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think awareness is a great place to begin of just recognizing that, oh, isn't that fascinating? I'm having an emotional response to something that it's kind of just a learning moment, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Very much so.
And I mentioned that there are small things that can happen as I'll continue to use the psychological term of stimulus in the workplace, whether it's somebody shows up late to a meeting. Let's say that you're a team leader and one of your direct reports shows up to the meeting late and you have an emotional response to that. You're frustrated. I told them to be on time. How's this making me look? All these kinds of things can bubble up and happen. But if we just sort of act on autopilot, like we talked about earlier, we miss the opportunity to have the awareness of the emotional response, make a better choice in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
something that's a little bit higher order. See, I love how you're putting this together for us like that.
Yeah, so awareness for me is really like also when we talk about the embodiment piece, it's the leading by example, right?
Mm.
And so leaders in particular across all corporations really need to have this level of awareness that they're coming into and they need to be taught how to access this and how to move in this direction, right? Because when you can have that kind of awareness, it changes an entire company culture. And now you
Right.
have wellness that comes to the forefront because you have people who are embodying it and leading it.
And I think a lot of times we have this almost like having a strong emotion is almost a pejorative, like oh no, why are we getting so emotional about this? And really, it's just I've heard it said before. Sometimes we hurt where we care, so it's like something that I value has been impinged, or there's something that's got my attention, and using that not as a way to feel badly about it or to get concerned or frustrated by it, but just to see it as a clue almost, and to be willing to pull on that thread a little bit and explore it. That seems to be something has served me well in the past, and it took me a long time to develop that.
Yeah, yes. So development, self-development is like we're ever under the road to construction, right? We're always under construction, the road to success. Lily Tomlin, love that, right? So the funny thing is that, when we learn to embrace that, and come to the forefront with it, and like you said, oftentimes emotion is not necessarily it's not, doesn't mean negative, right? Emotion could also be a lot of passion. Like somebody who has a lot of passion about something, I know because I just like I harbor those characteristics myself personally. But oftentimes my passion in my leadership roles could also be misconstrued pending somebody else's experience and background and upbringing, right? So we never know what another person's perception is of certain emotion. And so it's like understanding that,
Yeah, oftentimes I say you can't think somebody else's thoughts with your brain because it doesn't make sense. But I'm
right?
also hearing also you can't feel somebody else's thoughts with your brain either, or feel
Yeah.
their feelings with your brain. So that also applies.
Yeah.
I think that happens to us a lot where we say like, why is somebody getting so worked up over that? Well, they have a whole different set of experiences and reactions and a current state and a reality and level of consciousness and everything that you do. So why would they have the same reaction as you? They're not you. And I think this is the hallmark of
Yeah.
leadership is it's really about them, right?
Yes, yes, and understanding that more deeply, right? So, we have this term and we've always said it is about the we and not the I, and I have said you have to first address the I in order, and especially in today's world, right? These generations that are coming up underneath us, they really need to be validated. They really need to be seen and heard. And so it starts with the I, and then once you have that established, they're willing to then become a part of the we and allow you to lead. It's a trust
Yeah.
building.
Love that. I love that. Yeah, sometimes I say as leaders, we must go first. And that's that you're talking exactly about what I mean when I say that. And I think that then leading by example, you said a little bit earlier, so it's so true. I think a lot of times I talk to managers and leaders who say, I want more accountability within my teams. And I say, are we really leading by example? Are we demonstrating that type of accountability or modeling the types of leadership behaviors we say we want? Well, it's easier to say them than do them sometimes. We have to be careful about that.
Yes, agreed wholeheartedly, because the minute we are saying it and our actions aren't matching our words, there's going to be somebody out there who's going to call us out on it, sometimes graciously, sometimes not graciously. Our job, though, as leaders, is to self evaluate, right? And to have acceptance and adapt, right? Like our whole lives are about our ability to adapt and grow.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point too, that I have met a lot of leaders in my day. I have never met a perfect leader, and I am certainly far from one. But I think this constant evolution and adaptation is encouraging to know that we're all a work in progress. As you said earlier, this is something that can give us a lot of confidence that we're not done yet. We're still working away at this.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I perceive it as something that should be ongoing with all of the latest technology, all of the science that's presenting itself, right? All of the information that we have, not just at this juncture. Quantum computing is about ready to like again pull a whole new game change on us on the playing field. And so humanity really needs to meet technology at the forefront. And that means this self awareness and this ability to remain conscious and consciously aware of the choices that we're making, not just for ourselves, but also that ripple effect of expanding the circle, all of those around us.
Yeah, and you bring up this point about technology, and in your work, you had cited something that I hadn't really thought about before, and you noted that so much of our experience today and what we experience is related to what comes at us and beamed into us from online, and you note that we run the risk of finding ourselves in this echo chamber, as you call it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
so much about how uh, algorithms work and the content that we see coming back to us, et cetera. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because that was a fascinating sort of human technology connection I had never really paused to think about. And I think you're so right.
Thank you. Yeah, so for me, it's about the reality that if you pay attention to an algorithm, algorithms are literally just spitting back out to us in large part, not in totality necessarily, depending on the social media platform or the media platform, but in large part, it's repeating back to us and showing us where our area of focus is at the majority of the time. And so I often will encourage people, pay attention to your news feeds, pay attention to your social media feeds. Use it as a tool and a resource for you to understand where your train of thought is at primarily on a regular basis. And I encourage people, if it's negative, right? If they're finding that the majority of what's spitting back to them is all of the junk in the world, all the negativity in the world, right? Then I encourage them, hey, try clicking on one positive piece of information every single day and something that's educational and inspiring. And eventually, your algorithms will change, as will your mindset and your physical well being and the whole enchilada.
Wow. It's amazing because it also made my mind go toward creativity and innovation, where we need novelty. We need to be exposed to lots of different things. And
Yes.
I'm old enough to remember a time before we had all these algorithms, and we used to get suggestions like, "Go to the bookstore or the library and look at magazines that you've never read before." Like, go look at quilting magazines, even if you're not a quilter, just to get some inspiration. And I thought, how bizarre would it be to sit down and look at, Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn, but through the lens of somebody else's feed? Like, you would be totally
Uh,
like, "Wow, this is all this novelty. Like, I didn't know this much about any of these topics before." It would be a very disorienting kind of experience, I would imagine. But the alternative, the flip side of that, as you're pointing out, is if I'm only being beamed at me the same stuff that it knows I already like, where does the growth come from? Where does the novelty and the innovation and the inspiration really come from? We have to be careful about that too.
Yes, yes. And so, I always share with people programming is very important. And again, that should be a conscious choice. Oftentimes we will do things without even thinking about it. And the fascinating thing is that after I have CEOs, owners, right, work with me for a period of time, the one thing that we eventually get into is what's your programming like? And so I've had owners now come to me who said, "You know what? I did this thing this weekend that I never thought I would do." And I'm like, "Really? What'd you do?" Right? And they're like, "Well, I got up and I realized how frustrated and angry I was over my sports team starting to lose. And so for the first time in history, I just turned it off and walked away from it and made a choice to go do something else." And I was like, whoa, that's profound, right? But that's conscious awareness. Like, hey, how is this thing making me feel? How am I feeling right now? Right? What's my experience? And I, guess what? Like, I 9 times out of 10 can maybe control that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's really an application of something that I refer to sometimes as the optimization methodology, which I call awareness, insight, action. In this case, the three-step process, the owner is saying, "Oh, I became aware that, boy, I'm not at my best when I see my teams lose." The insight is, "Boy, that's how it's going to affect the rest of my day. How's it going to affect the way I show up with other
Yeah.
people?" And the action is, I just turned it off. It's like, wow, it's an example. It just plays out right
I
there.
just
Bang.
flipped a switch, right? I just flipped a
Flip the
switch.
switch. Yeah.
Yeah, and I use sports because that one just impressed me so much, right? Because it's
Yeah.
such a passionate thing for so many people. But really, when we think about it, that same holds true for anything we're consuming, whether we're reading, whether we're listening to music. Oftentimes, that one gets left out. But if you're
Yeah.
pay attention to what you're listening to because that affects your physical body as well. Even though it might rev you up for a workout, is it giving you optimal programming? Is it giving you your highest level of good, right? When what you're listening to. And so again, like just the mindfulness around everything that we're consuming.
Yeah, and I think this is also true in the organizational context. Sometimes, when we're in the break room, we're at lunch, we're meeting with somebody, maybe a peer, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
and we start to get into some of the things that are sort of the shortcomings of the business. Maybe there's a process that's not as efficient as we'd like, or some problem in the business. And it's very easy to fall prone to the sort of, I'll say, gossip, negativity, and
Griping.
try to use that as a way to socially connect with one another. But eventually it erodes and it just becomes this habitual behavioral thing. So when we find ourselves in that situation, as soon as that awareness kicks in using your framework, we can make a better choice. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, maybe cut that gossip a little bit short and say, are we complaining about this to solve a problem, or are we just trying to make ourselves feel better? Because there's probably healthier calories, better ways to do
Right?
that than
Yeah.
what we're doing, right? It's not easy, but as soon as that awareness is there, you're like, every time I'm talking to that person, we kind of fall into the same trap, and then I leave, and I'm kind of deflated, I'm de-energized for the rest of my day.
Yeah.
How do I make a change next time we get together and either change the subject or change the context or change something?
Yes, and that brings me to kind of like our thought patterns too, right? So one thing that I hear incessantly when I go into organizations, whether it be independent owners or corporations, it matters not. What happens is I hear the word stress being used like it's candy sitting in a bowl on everybody's desk, right? The word stress. And so that's one of the first things that I'll say, hey, how about if we pause on that? How about if we really think about how does that make me feel when I use that word, right? Am I getting the result and the physical result for my body and my system, let alone my mind and my emotions by using that word? Am I getting the result I want? Or can I just as easily, again, flip that switch? And can I use the word challenge or maybe even opportunity if I dare take that spin on it and a new perspective on whatever it is that's happening on my playing field?
Yeah, words matter a lot, and I know you've studied neurolinguistics. You understand the way that the words that we use, whether it's self-talk or how we choose to talk to others, it absolutely gets imprinted in our chemistry and in our wiring, so to speak. So I think words absolutely matter, and I love how you're saying, because I think I've seen the same thing you have. Stress is not universally a negative thing, even though we often talk about it in negative terms.
True. It just
There's
depends on the
eustress.
perception.
There's positive aspects of stress too.
Depends on the perception of the word stress, right? It depends on how it physically makes me feel and how I approach that word. So there's all kinds of different ways of looking at it.
100%. And without stress, there wouldn't be growth. There wouldn't be new tasks and strategies. There wouldn't be certainly new resilience and coping mechanisms. Stress creates opportunities in a business to change the way they do things. So it is. It's all about framing. And I talk a lot about reframing beliefs and in a way that elevates behaviors and helps us to really break through. So, God, I love where you're coming at from this foundation, and it really does all begin with awareness, just as you said.
Yeah, and also our perceptions. Yes.
Now, one of the other things, though, is that we often talk about this progression. You've talked about how things have really changed. You talked about Gen Z entering the workforce a little bit too. That
hmm
we're all kind of a work in progress, and you know that I have this view toward this enlightened enterprise concept and business as a force for good. And fortunately, we're seeing more and more examples of everything from B corporations and conscious capitalism and these types of things that are sort of in the same vein, right? And you've arrived at this similar observation as well. And I wonder how your clients, these leaders who come to you, how are they talking about this tug that they're feeling towards business kind of as it's always been done versus this business is a force for good and something they want to aspire toward, kind of an elevated form of business? How do they describe that to you? And then how do you help them accomplish that?
Yeah, so really it boils down to in some cases they're just at their wits end, right? Sometimes it takes being at our wits end with things and how things are feeling to us, especially if they're overwhelming, which in many cases they are, right? If we are the leader or at the helm and we're responsible for all of the things within the organization, including our people and their paychecks and so on and so forth, it can be daunting sometimes. It can feel that way, right? And so typically when a person gets to that point that then I'm able to come in and really say, like, let me explain a few things to you. Like, let's talk about some 80-20 principles and let's pull this into your playing field. Let's realize that the majority of all of the things that you're focused on in a day's time are probably not necessarily the most optimum for you. And how do we restructure this? right? So that now your days can become much more optimum and also feel much better to you. And so then
Right.
that includes, right, a lot of things that I will recommend, like getting out into nature, getting meditation on board, making sure that you're physically active on a daily basis, because all of those things are very necessary for us to become consciously aware and to hold our balance in the midst of chaos. These are tools that will give us resilience, right? And fortitude, which is vitally important.
Yeah, I think it's hard to imagine leading an organization that's doing great things in the world if we ourselves, as the leader, are kind of gummed up and we're
Mhm.
not present and we're not taking care of our bodies. We're not sleeping well. We're not having that vitality that you talked about. So I feel like this is back to another example we said earlier of lead by example and
Yes.
saying, like, I have to take myself offline. I have to do the mindfulness thing. I have to be present if I'm having any shot of my organization sort of inheriting those ripples and carrying them even further into our customers, into our stakeholders, certainly the employee experience, et cetera. So as leaders, again, it comes back to we've got to go first.
Yes, and oftentimes this topic right here really impacts scalability. Like
Mm.
people will take things as far as they can get them, right? But then oftentimes that's where we get called in as coaches and consultants because there's a roadblock now. Like I've achieved X, but I don't know how to get to Y, right? And I really want to get to Y. And so
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think that growth creates its own sets of challenges. Change, whether it's change in the market, change within our own internal company. You mentioned Gen Z coming online now. There, any number of different things can cause change, and I think that it's obviously something that's critically important for us to think about. What type of business do we want to run? What type of company do we want to build here?
Mhm.
And is it one that really just seeks that single agenda of just generating profit? We have to have profitable businesses. We get that,
For
but
sure.
at the same time, is that it? That's the sum total here in 2025 of all we're capable of? I don't think so. I think we can do better, and I think you're teaching us to do better.
And I think you are too. You have this as one of your, in your book, actually, purpose, right? Is one of the big, big things. And we are in total alignment there. People have to fully understand their purpose and embrace their purpose in order to be strong leaders for the future.
Yeah, really allows all that energy that you talked about at the top to kind of flow through us and through our organizations and all of our employees and everything else. Only good things happen, right? When we embrace that type of purpose, meaning the vitality, the presence that you talked about. So I love this conversation so much.
I do too.
Well, I'm going to switch us over here. I like to play a fun trivia game with my guests just for the heck of it. And I saw that you use that. I used the term in your opening that you're a business alchemist, and I don't know much about alchemy. I thought I'd get us a trivia question about alchemy. So you and I are a team. We have AI. We talked about technology earlier. Here at this point, we got AI that's asked us a question, and it is this: in alchemy, what was the legendary substance believed to turn base metals into gold? What was that?
Oh, goodness.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, goodness.
I I think this could be one of the Harry Potter things. What was that? They changed the name of it. It might be the Philosopher's Stone. It might be that one. Should we try that?
Sure.
Let's try that one. And listeners, if you're playing along at home, you can put in your own answer. We may not be right, but we're going to try this and see what happens and see how we do. Ding, ding, ding. Yes, that's correct. The philosopher, you
Oh,
got it right. It was a mythical substance sought after by alchemists, believed to have the power to transmute base metals into gold. There you go. Well, I tell you, you spun some gold for us today. I love this conversation, Aleda. But most importantly, where can my listeners go to learn more about you and all the great work you're doing?
yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn at Alida, Aileda Lindahl. And my website is www.askalita.com.
I love it.
I'm
Listeners, I'm going to have those links for
social.
you in the show notes. You're only one click away from connecting with Alida and being able to learn more about all this fantastic information we've been sharing today. Thanks so much, Alida, for joining me today on the show and sharing your wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.